I didn't want a neighbor. I certainly didn't want a grieving single father crashing into my carefully constructed, aggressively quiet life. People think grief is poetic. It's not. It's just spilled cereal on the porch and a 7-year-old staring blankly at a television screen. But when David knocked on my door, desperate, asking me to watch his kid for just 2 hours, I made the mistake of saying yes. And that was the day my walls finally started coming down. I bought the house at the end of Elm Street for the silence. After 5 years in a cramped downtown apartment with a man who thought screaming was a valid form of conflict resolution, I wanted to hear the floorboards settle. I wanted to hear the refrigerator hum. I was 34, newly single, and entirely comfortable with the idea of becoming the neighborhood hermit. I'm a freelance architect. I draft blueprints. I drink black coffee, and I mind my own business. Then the moving truck backed over my hostas. I was standing at the kitchen window when it happened. The heavy tires crushed the broad green leaves into the mud. I didn't march out there and yell. I just watched. A man stepped out of the driver's side. He looked like he hadn't slept a full night since the previous decade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans that were frayed at the heels. He ran a heavy hand over his face, staring at the house next door like it was an insurmountable problem. Then, the passenger door opened. A kid climbed down. Small for his age, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, even though the sky was bone dry. They were my new neighbors. I learned his name was David 3 days later. He knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. I answered it in my sweatpants, holding a mug of coffee, already annoyed. "I'm so sorry," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone. It matched the dark circles under his eyes. "You're Ian, right? The realtor mentioned you." "Yeah, I'm David. That's my son, Toby." He pointed a thumb back toward his porch, where the kid in the yellow raincoat was sitting on a moving box, kicking his heels against the cardboard. "I don't know you. You don't know me. And I have absolutely no right to ask this, but my childcare just fell through. I'm an ER nurse. If I don't show up in 30 minutes, they're going to fire me, and I can't afford to be fired right now." I just stared at him. The sheer audacity of it hung in the morning air. "I can pay you," David added, the desperation cracking through his voice. $20 an hour. He's quiet. He won't touch your stuff. It's just until noon. My sister is driving up from the city to take over." I looked at David. I looked at the misbuttoned collar of his shirt. I looked at the kid, who was now peeling tape off the box with methodical, silent focus. "I don't like kids," I said. "He doesn't much like adults right now, so you'll get along fine," David replied, without missing a beat. I sighed, a long, heavy exhale that surrendered my peaceful morning. "Fine, until noon." David's shoulders dropped 3 inches. He looked like he might collapse right there on my welcome mat. "Thank you. God, thank you." 10 minutes later, Toby was sitting at my kitchen island. He had a backpack clutched to his chest. David had kissed the top of his head, told him to be good, and practically sprinted to his rusted Subaru. I stood on the opposite side of the island. "So," Toby looked at me. His eyes were a dark, solemn brown. "So, I have to work," I told him, pointing to my drafting table in the corner of the living room. "You can watch TV or read, just don't draw on the walls." "I'm 7, not 2, Toby said quietly. "Fair enough." I went back to my blueprints. For the first hour, the kid didn't move. He just sat on the stool, staring at the grain of the wood. It was unsettling. Usually kids are a cyclone of noise and sticky fingers. Toby was a ghost. It bothered me more than a tantrum would have. I got up, walked to my supply closet, and pulled out a fresh pad of heavy stock drafting paper and a tin of charcoal pencils. I slid them across the island toward him. "TV's broken anyway," I lied. Toby looked at the pencils, then up at me. Slowly, he unzipped his raincoat, took it off, and picked up a piece of charcoal. When David's sister arrived at exactly 12:15, Toby had drawn a shockingly accurate, albeit disproportionate, picture of my coffee maker. He left the drawing on the counter. That evening, the doorbell rang. It was David. He was holding a cheap six-pack of beer. He looked marginally better. The frantic edge of the morning had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Hey," he said, holding up the cardboard carrier, "for saving my life today. And I have the cash." "Keep the cash," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'll take 2 of the beers. The rest are yours." He blinked, surprised. "You sure? It's good beer." It wasn't. He cracked one open for me, then one for himself. We stood on my porch in the fading evening light. The neighborhood was quiet. "He's usually a lot more talkative," David said suddenly, staring at the label on his bottle. "Before, I mean." "Before?" David took a slow drink. "Before my husband died. Car accident, 14 months ago." The words hit the air like lead weights. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the way you do when you step off a curb you didn't see. I had spent the last 2 years wallowing in the misery of a bad breakup, acting like I had been gutted because a guy named Greg decided he preferred his personal trainer over me. Standing next to David, my cynicism felt incredibly small. "I'm sorry," I said. "It was inadequate. It always is." "Yeah," David said. He didn't look at me. "Me too. Anyway, thanks again, Ian. Really." He walked back to his house. I watched him go, noting the heavy slope of his shoulders. I went back inside, picked up Toby's charcoal drawing of the coffee maker, and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. It didn't stop with that first morning. David didn't mean to make a habit out of me. He tried hired babysitters. He tried after-school programs. He tried leaning heavily on his sister. But life with a single income and a grueling nursing schedule is a house of cards. A babysitter gets the flu. A shift runs 2 hours long. A school calls for an early pickup because Toby threw up his lunch. Gradually, by proximity and my own failure to set a boundary, I became the emergency contact. "I feel like a parasite," David told me one Tuesday afternoon. He was standing in my kitchen again, this time dropping off a casserole dish of lasagna. It was his way of paying me since I absolutely refused his money. "It's fine," I said, putting the lasagna in the fridge. "I work from home. He sits at the island and draws. We barely speak. It's a very functional, emotionless arrangement." David smiled. It was a small thing, barely curving the corners of his mouth, but it changed his whole face. The perpetual gloom lifted for a fraction of a second, and I noticed for the first time that he was objectively handsome. The rugged, tired kind of handsome. The kind that makes you want to push his hair out of his eyes. I immediately shut that thought down. "He's a widower, Ian. You don't date a guy hauling a ghost. You barely survived a guy hauling an ego." "He talks about you, you know," David said, leaning his hip against my counter. He was wearing scrubs today, dark blue. They pulled tight across his chest. "I doubt that," I said, turning to wipe down a perfectly clean counter just to have something to look at besides his forearms. "I'm boring." "He says you know how to be quiet. Apparently, most adults talk too much." "He's not wrong." David laughed, a low, rumbling sound. You're a weird guy, Ian. I prefer particular. The dynamic shifted after that day. The desperate, transactional nature of our interactions started to soften into something resembling friendship. On the weekends, I'd see him out in the yard, wrestling with a lawnmower that hated him. Once, I walked over with my toolbox, silently swapped out the spark plug, and walked away while he was mid-sentence. He brought over a plate of burnt brownies that night as a thank you. Toby warmed up to me, too. He started bringing his own colored pencils. He learned that I wouldn't pepper him with questions about his feelings, his day, or his dead father. If he wanted to talk about Minecraft for 45 minutes, I would listen and nod. If he wanted to sit in dead silence for 2 hours, I matched it. One Friday evening in late October, David came over to pick Toby up. The boy had fallen asleep on my sofa, a sketchbook slipping from his fingers. David walked into the living room, stopped, and just stared at his son. The look on his face was agonizing, a mix of profound, overwhelming love and a bone-deep terror of failing him. "Don't wake him," I said softly from the armchair. "Just leave him. You can crash on the recliner if you want." I was just about to pour some bourbon. David looked at me. The exhaustion in his eyes was heavier than usual. He nodded slowly. I poured 2 glasses of neat bourbon. We sat in the semi-darkness of my living room, the only light coming from the street lamp filtering through the blinds. "Adam used to handle the nights," David said suddenly. His voice was a rasp in the quiet room. It was the first time he had said his husband's name out loud to me. "He was a writer," David continued, turning his glass in his hands. "Night owl. If Toby woke up from a nightmare, Adam was already awake. He'd read to him. I always slept right through it. Now," he took a swallow of the amber liquid, "now I wake up if the floorboards settle. I haven't slept properly in a 1.5 years. You're doing okay," I told him. "I'm not good at comfort. I deal in facts, in structures, in things that bear weight. He's a good kid. You're keeping him alive and fed. That's the baseline." David let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "The baseline? Yeah, that's about all I can manage." He looked over at me. In the dim light, the space between his recliner and my armchair felt suddenly, dangerously small. I could smell the sharp scent of the alcohol on his breath, mixed with the clean, sterile smell of hospital soap. "Why are you single, Ian?" he asked. The question lacked any polite filter, stripped bare by the bourbon and the fatigue. "Because my ex-boyfriend was a narcissist who liked the idea of being in a relationship more than the actual work of being in one," I said flatly. "And because I like my space. You let us in. You forced your way in. The moving truck killed my hostas." David smiled again. He leaned his head back against the chair, turning his face toward me. His eyes traced my jawline, lingering just a second longer than a neighbor should. A heavy, thick tension settled over the room. It wasn't friendly anymore. It was charged. The cynical, walled-off part of my brain hammered a warning alarm. Danger. Do not engage. Structural instability detected. "I should take him home," David whispered. He didn't move. "You probably should," I whispered back. I didn't get up to show him out. Eventually, the spell broke. David cleared his throat, stood up, and carefully scooped Toby into his arms. The boy mumbled something and buried his face in David's neck. I walked them to the front door. "Good night, Ian," David said softly. "Night, David." I locked the door behind them and stood in the dark hallway for a long time, listening to the silence of my house. For the first time in years, I didn't find it comforting. I found it empty. November brought a bitter, driving rain that didn't let up for 2 weeks. It stripped the trees bare and turned the neighborhood into a gray, washed-out painting. It also brought a catastrophic leak under David's kitchen sink. He texted me at 9 on a Thursday night. Water everywhere. Do you know how to turn off the main valve? I grabbed my flashlight and a wrench, threw on a jacket, and ran across the soaked lawn. David threw the front door open before I even knocked. He was drenched, wearing a white t-shirt that was plastered to his chest, his hair plastered to his forehead. I tried the valve under the sink. It's rusted stuck. It snapped, he said, panic edging his voice. Where's your basement access? He pointed. I took the stairs 2 at a time, found the main water line, and wrenched the heavy iron valve shut. The rushing sound of water above me ground to a halt. When I came back up, David was sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by soggy towels, staring at a puddle spreading across the cheap linoleum. Toby was safely upstairs, fast asleep, completely oblivious to the domestic disaster below. Crisis averted, I said, tossing the wrench onto the counter. David put his head in his hands. He didn't say anything. His shoulders began to shake. I froze. I can fix pipes. I can draft floor plans. I do not know what to do with a weeping man. I stood there awkwardly for a moment before kneeling down beside him in the damp towels. Hey, I said gently. It's just water. It's fine. We'll mop it up. Get a plumber out here tomorrow. It's not the water, he choked out, his voice thick and broken. He dropped his hands. His face was red, his eyes shining with unshed tears. It's the sink. It's the car making a weird noise. It's the electric bill. It's Toby's teacher saying he doesn't socialize. It's all of it. Adam used to fix the sink. Adam did the bills. I can't do it all, Ian. I'm drowning. I'm literally and figuratively drowning. I didn't think. I just reached out and gripped his shoulder. His muscles were tense, coiled tight as a spring. You aren't drowning, I told him, my voice firm. You're tired. There's a difference. He looked at me, his chest heaving. The vulnerability in his expression was a raw, open wound. People talk about grief like it's a noble, beautiful journey. It's not. It's ugly. It's humiliating, and it strips you down to your most basic, terrified parts. I'm so lonely, Ian, he whispered. The words hit me square in the chest. I shifted closer. We were sitting on a wet floor in a messy kitchen, but the rest of the world felt entirely shut out. I know, I said. David looked at my hand on his shoulder. Then he looked up into my eyes. The frantic panic had receded, replaced by something much heavier. He leaned in. It wasn't a smooth, romantic movement. It was hesitant, clumsy, born out of a desperate need for contact. His lips touched mine. They were cold from the rain, but the breath behind them was warm. My brain completely short-circuited. Every logical, cynical rule I had established for myself evaporated. I didn't pull away. Instead, my hand slid from his shoulder to the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his damp hair. I kissed him back, pressing into him. A ragged sigh escaped David's throat. He brought his hands up, gripping the lapels of my jacket, holding on to me like I was a piece of driftwood in the middle of the ocean. The kiss deepened, shifting from comfort to a sudden, starved intensity. It tasted like rain and salt, and the kind of longing that aches in your teeth. Then, just as quickly as it started, David tore himself away. He scrambled back, his hands hitting the wet linoleum. His eyes were wide, panicked. I'm sorry, he gasped, his chest rising and falling rapidly. God, Ian, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I can't. I'm sorry. My lips felt cold where his had just been. I stayed kneeling on the floor, trying to get my own breathing under control. David, it's fine. No, it's not. It's not fair to you. I'm a mess. My life is a mess. You just came over to fix a pipe, and I just threw myself at you because I'm pathetic. Stop, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I stood up, feeling a sudden, intense sting of rejection mixed with a profound empathy that I hated. You're not pathetic. You're human. He scrambled to his feet, refusing to meet my eyes. I need to clean this up. You should go. I'm sorry. He was shutting down. The walls were going back up, thicker and higher than before. I recognized the retreat because I had done it myself 100 times. I looked at him, standing there, shivering slightly in his wet shirt, clutching a soaked towel like a shield. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to kiss him again. I'll call a plumber I know in the morning, I said quietly, recognizing that pushing him now would only break things further. He won't overcharge you. Thanks, David muttered to the floor. I walked out the front door and back out into the freezing rain. The cold water hit my face, but it did absolutely nothing to cool the burning in my chest. I was in trouble. Deep, undeniable trouble. Because as I walked back into my quiet, perfectly ordered house, I realized the silence wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted the noise. I wanted the messy, complicated, grieving man next door. I was falling in love with David, and I had absolutely no idea how to survive it. He avoided me. I let him. That's the thing about being an adult. You don't have to have screaming matches to end something. You just send a polite text, change your schedule, and pretend the other person has ceased to exist. The plumber came. I paid him up front and told him to bill David a fraction of the cost, claiming a neighborhood discount. David texted a stiff, "Thank you. Check is in your mailbox." I didn't reply. For 3 weeks, we were strangers again. I went back to my blueprints. I drank my black coffee. I watched the autumn turn harsh and gray through my kitchen window. Sometimes, I'd see his Subaru pull out of the driveway before sunrise. Sometimes, I'd see Toby trudging up the porch steps in his oversized winter coat, followed closely by David's sister. It was exactly the quiet life I had paid for. It was miserable. I missed the noise. I missed the kids sitting silently at my island, leaving charcoal dust on my countertops. And God help me, I missed David. I missed the sharp, hospital soap smell of him, the heavy slope of his shoulders, the rare, exhausted smiles that made my chest tighten. But I wasn't going to chase a man who was running from me. I had enough self-respect left from my last disastrous relationship to know better than to force a locked door. Then came the first week of December. The weather forecasters had predicted a mild front. They were spectacularly wrong. An ice storm rolled in off the coast just after midnight on a Tuesday, coating the neighborhood in 2 inches of solid, unyielding glass. Power lines snapped like dry twigs under the weight. My house went dark at 2 a.m. I woke up, swore into the pitch-black room, and grabbed my flashlight. I had a heavy-duty generator in the garage, a remnant of my obsessive need to be prepared for the worst, and a cord of seasoned wood for the cast-iron stove in the living room. By 3 a.m., my house was humming with auxiliary power and smelling of wood smoke. I sat in my armchair, nursing a mug of instant coffee, watching the ice freeze in thick, jagged sheets against the window pane. I looked next door. David's house was pitch black. No generator hum, no glow of a fire. Just a dark, freezing box. I gave it 20 minutes. Then I put on my heavy boots, threw my thickest wool blanket over my shoulder, and walked out my front door. The air hurt to breathe. The walkway was a skating rink. I nearly broke my neck twice crossing the 10 yards of frozen grass between our properties. I pounded on his front door, the sound sharp and echoing in the dead silence of the neighborhood. Nothing. I pounded again, harder. "David, open the door!" A moment later, the deadbolt clicked. The door swung open a few inches. David stood there, illuminated by the weak beam of a cell phone flashlight. He was wearing a heavy coat, a beanie, and he had Toby wrapped tightly in his arms. The kid was shivering, his face buried in David's neck. "What are you doing?" David asked. His teeth were chattering. "I have a generator and a wood stove. My house is 70 degrees, I said flatly. "Pack a bag for him. You're coming over." "Ian, we can't." "I am not doing this with you right now, David. It's 12 degrees outside and dropping. Your house has zero insulation. You are coming over, or I am calling child services on you for letting him freeze to death out of pure, stubborn pride. Move." I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed past him into the freezing hallway, took Toby from his arms, and wrapped the thick wool blanket around the boy. Toby clung to me instantly, his little hands gripping the collar of my coat. He felt like a block of ice. David stood there, staring at me, the cell phone light trembling in his hand. The fight completely drained out of him. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion, and ran upstairs to grab a duffel bag. 10 minutes later, they were in my living room. I pulled the sofa closer to the wood stove, piling it high with pillows and every blanket I owned. Toby was curled up in the center of the nest, still wrapped in my wool blanket, drinking a cup of hot chocolate I had made on the camp stove. The color was slowly coming back to his cheeks. David sat on the floor near the hearth, staring blankly into the flames. He had taken off his coat, but he still looked rigid, completely wound up in his own tension. I sat in my armchair. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of the burning wood and the wind rattling the ice-coated windows. Eventually, Toby's eyes drooped. The warmth and the exhaustion took over, and he fell asleep, his breathing evening out into a soft, steady rhythm. David didn't move. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "If you apologize to me one more time for being human, I'm going to kick you back out into the snow," I said. My voice was low so I wouldn't wake the kid, but the edge to it was unmistakable. David finally looked at me. The shadows from the fire danced across his face, highlighting the deep grooves around his mouth and the hollows under his eyes. He looked broken. "I'm not apologizing for the storm," he said, his voice raw. "I'm apologizing for running." I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms. "Then stop running." "I can't just switch it off, Ian," he said, dragging a hand through his hair. "I kissed you, and for 5 seconds, I felt alive. I actually felt something other than this crushing, suffocating weight. And then I remembered Adam. I remembered that he's in a box in the ground, and I'm here in a kitchen, kissing another man. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was killing him all over again." He dropped his head into his hands. A harsh, ragged sound tore from his throat. I didn't move to comfort him this time. I let him cry. I sat there in the heavy silence, watching the man I was falling in love with grieve the man he had loved first. I wasn't jealous. You can't compete with a ghost. Ghosts are perfect. Ghosts don't leave wet towels on the floor or burn the coffee. When his breathing finally slowed, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "David, look at me!" He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "I'm not trying to replace him," I said quietly, deliberately keeping my tone as grounded as possible. "I couldn't even if I wanted to. You had a life with him. You built a home. That doesn't just vanish because you kissed a cynical architect who yells at moving trucks. I don't want to erase him. I want to know about him. I want you to tell Toby about him without choking on it." David stared at me, his chest rising and falling heavily. "But you are here," I continued, pointing a finger at the floor between us. "You are still here, and Toby is here, and you have to live, not just survive, not just pay bills and fix pipes. You have to actually live, David. If that means you need to sit in the dark and cry sometimes, fine. I'll sit in the dark with you. But you don't get to shut me out just because you're terrified of being happy again." Silence fell over the room. The fire popped, throwing a shower of orange sparks against the glass of the stove door. David looked from me to the sleeping boy on the sofa, and then back to me. Slowly, he pushed himself up off the floor. He crossed the short distance between us and knelt on the rug right in front of my chair. He didn't say anything. He just rested his forehead against my knee, his broad shoulders slumping forward in total surrender. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He was letting go. I reached down and rested my hand on the back of his neck, my fingers sliding into his hair. I didn't push. I didn't pull. I just held him there, anchoring him to the room, to the warmth, to the present. "Okay," David whispered into my jeans. "Okay." We didn't rush. The ice melted, the power came back on, and the neighborhood returned to normal, but the space between our two houses fundamentally changed. We started small, intentional. It wasn't just emergency babysitting anymore. It was David walking over on a Tuesday night with a bottle of wine that actually cost more than $10. It was me going over to his house on a Sunday morning and completely rebuilding his back deck because the wood was rotting. I learned how to navigate the minefield of his grief. I learned that on the bad days, the days when Adam's memory felt like a physical weight, David would clean obsessively. On those days, I'd just hand him the Windex, take Toby to the park, and give him space to hurt. I learned that he laughed the hardest when I complained about my clients. I learned that he took his coffee with an offensive amount of sugar, and he learned me. He learned that when I get stressed, I go completely silent and draft useless floor plans for impossible houses. He learned not to touch my drafting pencils. He learned that beneath my carefully cultivated wall of cynicism was a man who desperately wanted to be relied upon. By spring, the boundary line between our properties was practically ceremonial. "We need a gate," David casually mentioned one Saturday in May. We were sitting on my back porch. Toby was in the yard, aggressively trying to teach a stray neighborhood cat how to fetch a stick. The cat looked deeply insulted. I took a sip of my beer, eyeing the tall wooden privacy fence that separated our yards. A gate ruins the structural integrity of a privacy fence. It defeats the purpose of the word privacy. "A gate," David repeated, turning his head to look at me. "Would mean I don't have to walk all the way around the block when I want to see you at 6 in the morning. I looked at him. The dark circles under his eyes were mostly gone. He looked settled. He looked like a man who was finally learning how to breathe again. "I'll draw up some plans," I said. He smiled, reaching across the small table between us to lace his fingers through mine. His calluses scratched against my skin. It felt like solid ground. The real test came in July, the second anniversary of Adam's death. I had been bracing for it for a month. I expected the walls to come crashing back down. I expected the retreat. I told myself to be patient, to back off, to let him have his space to mourn. On the morning of the anniversary, I woke up early. I made a pot of coffee, walked out to the kitchen, and stopped dead in my tracks. David was sitting at my kitchen island. Toby was next to him. They were both in their pajamas. The kid was eating a bowl of cereal, entirely focused on a tablet screen. David was holding a mug, staring out the window at the morning light. He looked up when I walked in. His eyes were heavy, carrying that familiar, dark grief. But he hadn't locked his front door and hidden. He had walked through the newly built gate in the fence and sat in my kitchen. I didn't say anything. I just walked over, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stood next to him. "We're going to the cemetery at noon," David said quietly, his voice rough with sleep. "I know it's not really your place, and if you say no, I completely understand. But Toby asked if you were coming, and I'd like it if you did." I looked at the man I loved. He was offering me the heaviest, most fragile piece of his life, trusting me not to drop it. "I'll get dressed," I said. We went, the three of us. It was a blistering hot summer day, the kind where the air shimmers above the asphalt. The cemetery was quiet, shaded by massive ancient oaks. We stood in front of a simple gray headstone. Toby knelt down and placed a small, wildly disproportionate charcoal drawing of a dog against the granite. David stood perfectly still, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his jaw tight. I stood a few feet back. This wasn't about me. This was their moment. I was just the scaffolding, standing by in case the structure swayed. After a long time, David took a deep breath that sounded like a ragged sigh. He reached down, took Toby's hand, and stepped back from the grave. He turned to look at me. The grief was there, plain as day, but it wasn't consuming him anymore. It was just a part of the landscape. He reached out his free hand toward me. I walked forward and took it. His grip was tight, desperate, and grounding all at once. We walked back to the car like that, a chain of three, moving through the suffocating heat of the afternoon. Life didn't magically become a fairy tale after that. I didn't suddenly love children, though I fiercely loved that specific child. David still had nightmares sometimes, waking up in a cold sweat in my bed. I still hated noise when I was trying to draft. We still argued about whose turn it was to clean the gutters. But I realized something as the years moved on. As Toby grew tall enough to reach the top shelf, and David's gray hairs started multiplying at his temples. Love isn't the grand, sweeping romance you see in movies. It isn't a sudden, perfect alignment of the stars. Real love is ugly sometimes. Real love is a broken pipe at midnight. It's holding a man while he cries for someone else. It's building a gate in a fence you swore you'd never take down. I bought the house at the end of Elm Street for the silence. I wanted to be alone. But as I sat at my drafting table one Tuesday evening, listening to Toby argue with David about algebra in the living room, the sound of their voices overlapping, loud and vibrant and entirely disruptive, I put down my pencil. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the chaos. The silence was gone. And thank God for that, because my house was finally full. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Love isn't always easy, and it rarely looks the way we expect it to when it finally arrives, but it's always worth the work. If Ian and David's journey touched your heart, or if you know what it's like to find light in the darkest places, please leave a comment down below. I read every single one. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more original, deeply human romance stories every single week. See you in the next one.